Hello everyone and welcome to first episode of ALPI Interview. Today participants will be me and Milan Pešović. I'm Brankica Anđelković and I'm coming from Serbian Progressive Party. I'm a participant of ALPI program here in Serbia, also part of ALPI research team, social media team, and economy Caucus. And today I will be in a role of journalist, and with us is today Milan Pešović, and I would like to ask him to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Brankica. So my name is Milan Pešović, and I'm a student of economics at the FEFA faculty. I am also a member of the Economic Caucus at ALPI, and I also work for an American trucking company. So I'm looking forward to speak with you. But the most important thing for today is definitely that I serve as the chairman of the advisory board at EkonoMis, which should be very important and relevant to the topic for today.
Okay, it is known that during the ALPI program, ALPI gives lots of opportunities to their participants. And so I would like to ask you, what motivated you to establish the non-government organization EkonoMis and how to involve young people in similar initiatives?
Thank you very much. So I never had a lack of motivation since I have been involved in the NGO sector for about 5 years now. I have served as the regional director for Western Balkans and European Students for Liberty for a number of years. I was also involved as a programs intern at the Ayn Rand Center of Europe, which was then called the Balkan Objectivist Center. And throughout my activism, I was able to come across a lot of great young minds who have done a lot of to contribute to a better society in Serbia, and I have learned a lot of things. So I never really lacked the motivation, but Alpi was there to bring it to a new height and to definitely give me resources and opportunities and connections to start something of my own. It came in the right moment because I was coming to a natural end of my career with Students for Liberty, and I was thinking that I definitely need to start something on my own. And I felt like I want to skip the bureaucratic procedure, and I want to be my own decision maker. I want to be the one who's going to be in charge of deciding what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it, and then handle all the resources. So that's how the idea of Economist came last summer. It was right around when we started the Economic Caucus of Alpi. I realized that we have a potential to start something to educate people and to involve people. And the second part of your question was how to involve young people in similar initiatives. I think that the most important thing we need to do is to start giving them attention, not ignore them, and we need to involve them in the decision-making process. At Economics, our first campaign is called Glas Mladih, which will be roughly translated to Voice of the Youth, where we want to basically have anybody who thinks they can say something and make sense to say it, and we want to publish it to give them support to empower them to do so. And we want people who make sense, who are young people, to be celebrated in the society, not to be told that they shouldn't speak up or that they should wait for their time, because that time might never come. It's easier for them to leave the country than to wait, and we don't want to wait. The time of the young people is now, and we want them to be involved. We want to appeal to them. We want the country to be appealing to them to stay here and to build their own future. That is our goal. And I know this is a lot of words, and we need actions to have people stay here. So my first goal is to create a network where everybody who thinks they can say something and make sense, and if it's in the best interest of the Serbian economy, which is the goal of economics. We want to improve the economic environment. We want people to understand what the economic processes in the country are. We definitely want you to reach out to us, to me or to economists, and we want to establish a potential cooperation. We want to empower you. We want to give you resources, connections, means. We want you to have a reason to stay and voice your opinion. That is what we want, and that's what we will try to do. Now, I realize I sound kind of like a politician when I say this, but it's important to understand this. We have absolutely no ambitions to get involved in politics whatsoever. We want to do what we can through a different means to the NGO sector to motivate people and to become important figures in the intellectual movement in Serbia.
Yeah, and we discussed last year in Economic Caucus about agriculture products. What's your opinion now about that in this pandemic
Oh,
situation?
there we go. Well,
No.
yeah, I have a very interesting opinion compared to many when it comes to agricultural um, economics. Namely, I am absolutely against any kind of subsidies because I think it's used as a mainstream substitution for the rule of law, where investors are given flat money in order not to worry that we do not have a very good business environment here in Serbia. But I definitely think that the agricultural part of economics is of a different sort of importance when it comes to strategic leadership in and the politics in the country. We definitely need to have food at any time, and in times of a pandemic where the economic systems of of the whole world are in crisis, where we have a recession that is of global measures comparable to the one in 2008. And not just that, it's not about just shrinking the economy, it's about the health of the people, it's about our ways to trade, to move, to transport. Everything has been absolutely shook, and we are trying to find new and innovative ways to make things move, to make things happen. In those kind of things, I definitely would say that the role of the government would be to find the absolutely best way to make sure that the agriculture does not suffer more than it has to. But I also want to say this: I think that the misconception that is usually present in Serbia is that people believe that the government should take care of it or do something. The truth is, the biggest amount of people, the greatest amount of people who do business in the agriculture are actually private people who are trying to make something out of their land, and we need to find the best possible solution for the government and the private sector to work hand in hand to combat the crisis. I definitely think that the government shouldn't really invest taxpayer money in the agriculture business, not more than it has to. I think I'm always in favor of a different approach. I think that certain uh, parts of the economy should be stimulated through a different way, through tax breaks. I definitely think if you have a crisis that is as big as this one, you have an incentive to create even more, and you need to feed people who are desperately in need, who are unsure of how tomorrow is gonna go, who are not sure how they will meet month's ends and how they will make the money that they need to make. So I don't think like what we discussed was whether it's an opportunity for us to export agriculture products. I don't think that is the case. I think first of all, yeah, no modern economy relies on that. That's a given. Most economies are more inclined to go towards services and products of a different nature and technologies. I definitely think food is important, but I don't think it is it is the right way to look at our investment opportunities. I think that what we have is definitely cheaper food than many, but not the cheapest on the market. That's also true. And it's also important to know that there are also other global contenders like China, which does a lot of food production. I don't have it on the top of my head, but I think like 60% of the strawberries in the world are produced in China, and I was shocked to find that out because I didn't expect it. I love strawberries, and I didn't know. So yeah, definitely it needs to be tackled in a different way, and I'm gonna abuse the question that you gave me to tackle something else. I feel like the private sector, and this is especially true in Serbia, hasn't been used in a proper manner to help combat the crisis. And I often talk about how when we talk about the health services and healthcare, we have a lot of private healthcare in Serbia, but they are not used in the best possible way to help us combat this crisis. When you look at the testing, the PCR testing is exclusively done in public healthcare institutions, and also the whole healing process, hospitalization, it's only done in public
It will be another
hospitals.
question, Milan, about vaccination and the COVID health. So I
Awesome.
need to stop you just a little bit. Okay, we are going now on the next question. And the most common topic these days is definitely economy and on economy is the same. We see that the crisis caused by coronavirus has shaken the economies of the richest countries. So what's your economic predictions for our country, for world? What do you want to say about that?
I always like when I'm asked questions which should be aimed at those that work at the IMF or the World Bank, and then I have to pretend that I actually can do something of that magnitude. It is definitely a tough spot to predict anything. I would say, and I'm gonna briefly touch upon the next question. I definitely think that the speed in which we actually managed to do vaccination, Serbia as an individual country, and also the rest of the world, will be the most important thing when it comes to economic recovery. Now,
Yes.
I'm gonna just briefly say what I think about the economic impacts of vaccination. A lot of people think that vaccination is done for profits only, and that's true to a certain extent. But people need to understand that developing and creating vaccines costs hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a very painstaking process. And if we don't act now, we can record even more losses to the economy itself. Now, what's important from the economic standpoint is that vaccines are preferred to other sorts of medication from an economic standpoint because A, they are cheaper, B, they are used as a substitution to healing people, to hospitalizing people, and to giving them medications when they are already incapable of producing um, uh, additional labor and create added value. So the key thing here is to understand that vaccines are, from an economic standpoint, the most desired way to combat the coronavirus because they are cheaper and they are more effective. They are the preventive measure, and I'll talk more about that in the next question. When it comes to predicting what's going to happen in the economy, I definitely don't feel comfortable doing that, especially not in Serbia, because if you asked me a year ago, I wouldn't have thought that we would be sitting here and talking about the same things now as we were a year ago because we're again at the same position that we were, except we have vaccines now and there's some sort of light at the end of the tunnel. At this point, I would definitely say if the vaccination goes at this rate, we could see improvement in maybe half a year, things going back to normal. We definitely have a lot of problems in that department. I think that most of the measures that were done by the government of Serbia, I disagree with. First of all, I think that the private sector is having a lot of the burden on their backs when it comes to this crisis. I feel like the money that we give them, the minimum wages that we give them, whether it's two or three of them, that's not enough to meet to meet what they need to have. That's not enough to come out of the month and also feed their families. And my goal here isn't to appeal to people's emotions. I want to say something else, and that's that when you have a business owner who has a bunch of people working for him, if you give him the minimum wage, that's not necessarily how much he's paying his employees and how much taxes he has to do. And a lot of people have mortgages and credits and loans that they need to pay back. So at some point, some business owners feel that it's easier for them to let people go, like fire them and lay off workforce, than to accept these measures. And that's a primary example of how measures shouldn't be done. I'll give you a very interesting um, information. For the first time in history of Serbia, the public debt of Serbia was increased to $28 billion, and this was on March 5th this year. This is ironically happened on the president's birthday, but it was $28.6 billion on that day. And now many people will say, well, yeah, sure, that's because we have a global crisis going on. And that is partially true. But what we also have to understand, it's not the crisis itself that's producing the public debt, it's the inadequate policies of the government that do. So that's something to keep in mind, definitely. When it comes to the global economy, I definitely am feeling optimistic. I am a little concerned how the European Union is addressing the vaccination process and what they are doing right now. I feel like it's coming to a surface. Now, let me say, I'm not a Eurosceptic by any means, but I am definitely concerned the bureaucracy and the level of bureaucracy through which the European Union is going when it comes to distributing vaccines, and that they are definitely not where they should be. From what I'm seeing in the data, we are definitely doing better than them when we're comparing the percentage of people that are vaccinated.
I spoke to people who live in Germany, and the date that we'll get the vaccine will be maybe in August or September. So, okay, vaccination is going to the countries in the West, but you say the right thing. In Serbia, we will get it faster, and part of them who have houses here and citizens here, they will have vaccine here and be vaccinated in the shortly time. So that question will be diplomatic war for vaccine or revenue injection for the economies of producing countries. What do you think about that?
Well, I wouldn't call it a diplomatic war for vaccines because I would say that it's in everybody's best interest that most of the countries have the most possible amount of vaccines. I don't think it's just like in economics, I don't think it's a fixed pie where if one side gets a bigger pie, piece of the pie, the other gets a smaller one. I just think that we need to find ways in which we can cooperate to make things happen. And let me emphasize this once again. Vaccination is the most important way in which we can combat this because it's the preventive measure
Agree.
for us to it's the preventive measure for us to come out of this. It's for not for us to wait for people to get sick. And I read this from our friends at Tržišno Rešenje, the blog, which would be translated to Market Solution, which is popular in Serbia. And they said it's a perfect example of the moral hazard when people refuse to be vaccinated because deep down they know that that doctor is waiting on them if they get sick and will take care of them. But the problem is when you have a large number of people doing so, that is far, far uh, exceeding what the capacity of our healthcare system is. And that's a big problem. And to add problems onto that, as I said earlier, the private sector, the private healthcare institutions are not utilized in the proper manner. They went through all the background and different sort of checks that they need to. They meet all the requirements, but we have a total lack of interest from the government to include them. And I'll give you an example. I had the coronavirus about a month ago, and I was definitely unsure of how that's gonna play out. I definitely wanted to get tested and everything that I can. I was perfectly fine and willing to pay as much money as I had to pay to go to a private healthcare institution to have myself tested and get treatment and everything. And the PCR tests are not allowed at the private clinics, even though they can probably import them just like the government can, or they can buy them. It's not possible to do them. So everybody has to go through the same process and wait. And listen, some people will say, yeah, that's the most fair way to go through a crisis. I disagree. I think it's a socialist way of looking at things. I would say if I am myself perfectly fine to pay, I don't know, 50 or 100 euros to pay for doing the test and everything that I need to do to skip waiting in the line, then why am I not able to do so? I was a little concerned at first because I wanted to test myself, but I wasn't sure if I'm positive. And then going into a public COVID clinic is a risk of its own. So in that sense, I think that the government needs to definitely encourage people more to get vaccinated. I think there's a lot of problems in that department. First of all, if you look around, we are over a year now in a global epidemic, and we have people who do not properly wear their mask. That is inexcusable, and I think the fault lies on the government as much as it lies on the people, because a lot of people rely on the state to educate them in that sense. I think that on national television you would have had ads playing every day, I don't know, like 10 20 times a day, which would tell people how to properly wear masks, how long they can wear the mask, how many times you see people with masks which are dirty. So those kind of little things will make all the difference, because we do not have the awareness as a nation. That's why we need to step up. I mean, you probably saw, it was like 2 days ago when people were protesting and they started playing the call around the monument in Belgrade. That was absolutely inexcusable.
Definitely.
And I blame the listen, as a libertarian, I'm very inclined to blame the government. And I think the politicians are doing a disservice to the people in understanding the crisis and also understanding economics. And I'm gonna abuse your questions once again, because there's something I need to emphasize when it comes to political communication. What we in economics want to do is to make people aware of understanding the economic processes, to understand what is going on in in their environment, in their local community, and how they can get more involved. We have politicians who are doing very bad things on national televisions. Politicians in Serbia are contributing in a very negative way to the understanding, or rather misunderstanding, of how economics works, and they aren't being held accountable for the things that they say. And I'll give you two examples of that. The president of Serbia, Mr. Vucic, commented on the economic crisis in the United States and said, and this was said on national television, he said that he isn't too worried because the United States can even print money to get out of crisis. This was said on national television, and this is a ludicrous idea. It's completely unfounded, and as a matter of fact, it has been disproven throughout history, as in the cases of the Great Depression, where Professor Friedman proved how the Federal Reserve was actually the contributing factor in prolonging the crisis because of inadequate monetary policies. And if you look at any other example of hyperinflation throughout history, from the Weimar Republic to Zimbabwe, you'll notice that there's a sort of pattern that is based on the inherent flaw of centralized decision making. The measures which are enacted more often than not represent inappropriate solutions and can make problems even worse. It is totally contradictory to monetary economics, and it's coming from a figure of authority who can influence a great many of people. And I'll give you another example, which was also national television. And that was when Ms. Tepic, who is a leading opposition leader, said how mandatory school uniforms would be a good way to stimulate the textiles industry. And again, this was said in front of a national audience, and it's a bogus statement. It's a prime example of how people's intuitive feelings are being pushed to a populist narrative that is contrary to what a market economy does. Our goal as an organization is to talk about these things, to make people aware that giving people power to act and say irresponsible things, to be so irresponsible in their choice of words, or even worse, policies, can lead to a dangerous path. We believe that the free market enterprise is the way to get out of crisis. It's also the way to achieve prosperity in a long term way. But we don't want people to think it's good because we say it is. We want them to understand things and processes better, and then to develop critical thinking and to evaluate what we have to say, and then voice their approval or disapproval of what we want or what we have to say. That's the key thing that we want to do. That's what we want to accomplish. And when it comes to the whole situation, I can only remain an optimist, but look at what's happening around us. Like when you see how people are acting in an irresponsible manner and nobody's being held accountable, I think that's the main problem. I feel like whether it's the government or it's people, private citizens, we have a total lack of accountability and responsibility. We want to hold somebody accountable when things don't go right. Why? Well, because it's not about just healthcare system. It's about the small business owners who are closed for days now, who will need to find ways to feed their families, to pay all their debts, to make a living, and to come out of this crisis. And then we also have the lockdown as a possible last resort measure. I'm deeply concerned that nobody is talking about all the consequences of the lockdown. Everybody is talking whether we should get vaccinated or not, and that's a good topic. But nobody's talking what happens if we lock people. What about the suicides? Last week we had three young people, three teenagers in Belgrade who committed suicide. They weren't connected in any way. They were in three different parts of the town. They didn't know each other from what we know. And they killed themselves in the same day. And that's a tragic, tragic thing. Of course, we have to suffer some consequences as to our social lives, and we have to change some of the way that we live. We have to sacrifice something. But we have to understand that certain measures are definitely not in the best interest. We need to talk more about mental health. What happens with people when you lock them? What happens to businesses? They aren't just a number or statistics. They are our neighbor, our family, our friends, our loved ones who we have to take care of, who have to take care of us. We need to support them. We cannot just sit idle and let the government lock them because that's not the proper way to do. And I'll just briefly touch on what I said. The people who were dancing around the monument 2 days ago, that's certainly going to contribute to the rise of the number of infections in the next 2 weeks. And who's going to suffer because of that? It's going to be the small business owners who will not be able to work. And that's bad for the whole economy because the small business is what drives the economy. They are the largest contributing factor in the economy. It is the largest number of people in the economy. And those are the people that we need to take care of. We need to understand that certain measures, like why wouldn't barbers be able to work if they do everything according to the measures, or shops? Like,
Okay, I will return you on the economic topic. I'm interested
sure.
in your opinion about free market, about vaccination. Do you think that the contracts in whole world respected all the things that they were telling about vaccine, about the date of when we get our doses and everything else?
Well, of course not. Simply because besides the contractual um, obligations that exist, there is also the fact that diplomacy is very important in acquiring vaccines. And, if a larger and more powerful country pays the pharmaceutical company to get those vaccines ahead of time, then why wouldn't the pharmaceutical company give them the vaccines and then just pay a fine in case they even get one? And getting one is pretty much wishful thinking at this point. There's nothing to indicate to us that they would pay something. And even if they do, imagine the length of the court process that you would have to go through if you sue a pharmaceutical company, because it'd be probably 2 or 3 years or even more in courts to win. But by that time, you will have to fight a pandemic which is going on for a year already now, and you need to vaccine those people. So I definitely don't think that you can attribute that to the free market as a fault, or to the um, obligations coming from the contracts or the courts. It's definitely more complicated than that. Where I see the benefits of the free market is that those companies which are developing the vaccines are privately owned and they are driven by profits. And that's something very good. We need to stop demonizing those kind of economic activities. It's perfectly fine, it's perfectly normal. Imagine how much they had to invest. If somebody is able to bring humanity, not just our society, the entirety of the world, the entire global population, to function normally as it's intended to, well, the least that we should do is feel grateful and support them in getting profits. So I'm not saying drive the prices of vaccines to an abnormal level. That's not moral because vaccines do not have a substitution. But at this point right now, we have enough vaccines to choose from that we can rest assured that will not go to a ludicrous amount of money. So, and if there wasn't a free market in it, we wouldn't have that. The pharmaceutical companies would have way more power to dictate the amount of money, how much it would cost. And I'll give you an example on that, why I'm talking about that in the way that I am. If you imagine the prices of masks a year ago, you couldn't come to masks, and it wasn't just here, it was in the entirety of Europe. And then you had different sort of policies that were tackling the prices of masks. In Serbia, they were very expensive, and everybody thinks it's because the companies that produced them wanted to get rich off of them. That's not true. It's because the demand was so high, and what economics
Offer
teaches
and
us
demand.
is when the demand rises to an abnormal level like that, the prices also rise because you have to combat other economic actors on the market. And that's a perfectly normal process. What I think the government did bad then is that they didn't allow the free market to flourish. We needed to let the market regulate itself for private citizens to sell masks, not just public pharmaceutical companies and shops.
Okay, Milan, thank you for your response. Do you want to tell anything more
Follow
about our
EkonoMis.
yeah, okay, it was all for this first episode of ALPI interview. I want to thank Milan for a great conversation, for his response, and that will be all.
Thank you very much, Brankica, and thanks for ALPI for hosting us.
Thank you. Thank you, Milan.